A small figure stood motionless in front of the grand display window of Barrington's luxury toys. 8-year-old Lily wore threadbare clothes, her sneakers held together with duct tape, but her eyes sparkled with wonder at the beautiful doll behind the glass. What she didn't know was that today would end in tears as she was forcefully ejected from the store for looking too poor to be a customer. But fate had placed someone else in the store that day, Keanu Reeves, and his response to witnessing this injustice would not only change Lily's life forever but would force an entire community to confront its prejudices. The city never slept, its streets always bustling with activity. Downtown Westfield was known for its elegant boutiques, fine dining, and the prestigious row of shops on Magnolia Avenue. Among these stood Barrington's luxury toys, its golden lettering gleaming against a pristine white facade. The store was a monument to childhood dreams, if those dreams came with price tags few could afford. For 8-year-old Lily Morgan, Barrington's was a palace of wonders she could only admire from afar. Her life existed on the other side of the city, in a small apartment she shared with her grandmother in the aging Oak Ridge neighborhood. Their home was modest but clean, filled with second-hand furniture and mended curtains. Since her parents' accident 3 years ago, Grandmother Morgan had done everything possible to give Lily stability, working 2 jobs despite her arthritis. Twice a month, when her grandmother received her pension check, they would take the 40-minute bus ride to downtown. Grandmother had a cleaning job at one of the cafes near Magnolia Avenue, and Lily would spend those hours wandering the nearby streets. It was during one of these walks that she first discovered Barrington's and the beautiful Dreamer doll. The beautiful Dreamer wasn't just any doll. She had chestnut hair that fell in perfect waves, eyes that seemed to change color in different lights, and a delicate face that reminded Lily of her mother. The doll wore a blue dress with tiny stars embroidered along the hem, and when wound up, she played a lullaby Lily somehow recognized from her earliest memories. At $189.99, the beautiful Dreamer might as well have cost $1 million. Still, Lily visited whenever she could, standing outside the display window, fingers pressed against the cold glass, imagining what it would be like to hold the doll in her arms. On rare occasions, when the store wasn't busy with actual customers, Lily would venture inside, careful to be respectful, quiet, and not touch anything except, sometimes, when Mrs. Harrington wasn't looking, the beautiful Dreamer's hand. Mrs. Eleanor Harrington was the 3rd-generation owner of Barrington's luxury toys. Her grandfather had opened the store in 1947, and she maintained its reputation for exclusivity with iron determination. Tall and elegantly dressed, Mrs. Harrington could estimate a customer's spending limit with a single glance. She knew the children of celebrities, business magnates, and politicians by name. She prided herself on the store's atmosphere, hushed voices, classical music playing softly, immaculate displays that children were taught to admire rather than touch. Lily's worn clothes and scuffed shoes had not escaped Mrs. Harrington's notice. The first few times the child had entered the store, Eleanor had watched her closely, expecting shoplifting or misbehavior. Instead, she found only quiet reverence, particularly for that one doll. Still, the girl's presence made her uncomfortable. Barrington's catered to a certain clientele, and little girls with patched coats did not fit the image she cultivated. The regular customers of Barrington's were accustomed to the finer things in life. They brought their children in wearing cashmere and designer shoes, purchased multiple toys without checking price tags, and discussed summer homes and private schools while their selections were being gift-wrapped. They were the backbone of Eleanor's business, and she believed they expected a certain environment when they shopped, one unsullied by reminders of the less fortunate. The wealthy mothers would sometimes notice Lily during her visits. Some would smile kindly, others would pull their own children closer as if poverty might be contagious. Most simply looked through her, as though she were as invisible as the mannequins displaying baby clothes. Despite this, Lily kept returning to Barrington's. The beautiful Dreamer called to her in a way she couldn't explain, even to her grandmother. Perhaps it was because the doll represented everything Lily didn't have: beauty, perfection, and a permanence that wouldn't be taken away. Or perhaps, in that porcelain face, Lily saw a reflection of happier times, when her parents were alive and the world felt safe. What Lily didn't know as she planned her next visit to Barrington's was that fate had set in motion events that would transform not only her relationship with the beautiful Dreamer but the hearts of those who had looked past her for so long. An encounter was coming that would challenge everything Mrs. Harrington believed about her store and the people worthy of entering it. Rain fell steadily that Tuesday afternoon, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected light. Lily pulled her thin jacket tighter as she hurried toward Barrington's, her sneakers soaking through with each puddle she couldn't avoid. Grandmother's shift at the cafe had started at noon, giving Lily 3 precious hours before they would meet for the bus ride home. The warmth of Barrington's enveloped Lily as she slipped through the heavy glass door. A bell chimed softly, announcing her entrance. The scent of wood polish and expensive perfume filled the air. The store wasn't busy today. A mother and daughter examined music boxes near the register, while a man in a dark coat browsed through the collection of wooden trains. Mrs. Harrington was helping an elegantly dressed woman select between 2 teddy bears, each costing more than Grandmother Morgan's weekly groceries. Lily moved quietly toward the display where the beautiful dreamer stood among other collector dolls. Water dripped from her jacket onto the polished floor, leaving a trail of small droplets that she didn't notice. Her shoes squeaked slightly as she walked, drawing a sharp glance from Mrs. Harrington, who frowned at the wet footprints marring her immaculate floors. Reaching the display, Lily felt the familiar flutter in her chest. The beautiful dreamer seemed to smile just for her today, the blue dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. Lily whispered a soft hello, as she always did. In her imagination, the doll whispered back, telling her about all the things they would do together if only Lily could take her home. 20 minutes passed as Lily stood there, lost in her private world with the beautiful dreamer. She reached out, gently touching the doll's small porcelain hand. The doll's skin felt cool and smooth, so different from her grandmother's warm, wrinkled fingers. Lily imagined brushing that perfect hair, changing the blue dress for the pink one that came in the box, winding up the music box and the dolls back to play that haunting lullaby. Mrs. Harrington finished with her customer, completing the sale of a teddy bear that cost more than $300. As the woman left with her purchase, Eleanor's attention returned to the small, bedraggled figure by the collector dolls. The child was touching the merchandise again. Worse, today she had tracked water and possibly dirt onto the pristine floor. This had gone on long enough. Eleanor approached Lily with measured steps. "Excuse me, young lady," she said, her voice crisp. Lily jumped slightly, pulling her hand back from the doll. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just looking." "You're not just looking. You're touching expensive merchandise with dirty hands." Mrs. Harrington's voice carried across the store, causing the remaining customers to turn and stare. "And you've tracked water all over my clean floor." Lily looked down, noticing for the first time the wet footprints she'd left. Her face flushed with shame. "I didn't mean to make a mess. I can clean it up." "That won't be necessary." Mrs. Harrington crossed her arms. "I've noticed you coming in here regularly, but you never buy anything. This isn't a museum or a shelter from the rain. Barrington's is for customers." Lily's eyes welled with tears. "I just wanted to see the beautiful dreamer. I'm saving up to buy her someday." Mrs. Harrington let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "That doll costs nearly $200. Let's be realistic." She looked pointedly at Lily's worn clothing and continued, "I think it's time for you to leave. Come back when you're actually able to make a purchase." The man browsing the wooden trains had stopped, watching the interaction with a furrowed brow. The mother and daughter by the register whispered to each other, the girl staring openly at Lily. "Please," Lily whispered. "I won't touch anything else." "I promise." "I'm afraid I must insist." Mrs. Harrington took Lily by the shoulder, her grip firm but not painful, guiding her toward the door. "Barrington's has a reputation to maintain. Our customers expect a certain environment." As they reached the door, Lily looked back at the beautiful dreamer one last time. Through her tears, the doll seemed to be watching her, perhaps saying goodbye. "Don't come back unless you're with an adult who can afford to shop here," Mrs. Harrington said as she opened the door, ushering Lily back into the rain. The door closed behind her with finality. Lily stood on the wet sidewalk, rain mingling with her tears. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Harrington already retrieving a cloth to wipe away the evidence of Lily's visit. The beautiful dreamer grew smaller as Lily backed away from the store, her small shoulders hunched against both the rain and the humiliation. What Lily didn't see was the man with a wooden train set placing it back on the shelf, his expression darkening as he watched Mrs. Harrington clean up after the child's departure. Nor did she notice when, moments later, he quietly left the store, looking in both directions along the wet sidewalk before turning in the direction Lily had gone. The man in the dark coat left Barrington's with purposeful strides, his eyes scanning the rainy street. He spotted Lily half a block away, a small figure huddled under the awning of a closed bookshop. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. Despite the baseball cap pulled low over his forehead and the scarf partially covering his face, this was unmistakably Keanu Reeves, though no one on the busy streets seemed to notice. Keanu had been in town filming his latest project, a drama about family reconciliation. He'd wandered into Barrington's looking for a gift for his co-star's daughter, wanting something special and unique. What he found instead was a scene that stirred something deep within him, a child's humiliation at the hands of someone who should have known better. Inside the store, Keanu had observed Lily's reverence for the beautiful dreamer doll. He noticed how carefully she moved, how she whispered to the doll as if sharing secrets. There was something in her demeanor that reminded him of his own childhood, of wanting things that seemed perpetually out of reach. He had been about to approach Mrs. Harrington to inquire about the wooden train set when the confrontation began. As he listened to Mrs. Harrington dismiss Lily's dreams and escort her from the store, Keanu felt a familiar discomfort. Throughout his career, he had witnessed the stark contrasts between privilege and struggle, between those who had never known want and those who lived with it daily. He had made a personal commitment years ago to bridge those gaps whenever possible, usually anonymously and away from cameras. Now, standing several feet from the girl, Keanu cleared his throat gently. "That's some pretty serious rain," he said, his voice warm despite the chill in the air. Lily looked up, quickly wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She didn't recognize him. To her, he was just a kind-looking stranger. "Yes, sir," she responded automatically, the politeness her grandmother had instilled in her surfacing even through her distress. "I saw what happened in there," Keanu said, moving closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. "That wasn't right." Lily looked down at her soaked shoes. "Mrs. Harrington says the store is only for real customers. I was just looking at the beautiful dreamer." Her voice caught on the doll's name. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "The doll with the blue dress? She's pretty special, huh?" For the first time, Lily smiled slightly. "She plays my mom's lullaby. At least, I think it's the same one. I don't remember it very well." There was a moment of silence between them, filled only by the sound of rain hitting the awning above. "My name's Keanu," he said finally, deliberately not using his last name. "I'm Lily Morgan," she replied. "I should go find my grandmother. She works at the Happy Spoon Cafe." Keanu nodded. "The Happy Spoon? I know where that is. Mind if I walk with you? I've got an umbrella we can share." Lily hesitated, remembering her grandmother's warnings about strangers. But there was something trustworthy about this man's eyes, something that made her feel safe despite the day's events. "Okay," she agreed softly. As they walked toward the cafe, sheltered under Keanu's large black umbrella, Lily gradually told him about her grandmother, their apartment in Oak Ridge, and her monthly visits to see the beautiful dreamer. What she didn't know was that with each step, Keanu's resolve was strengthening. By the time they reached the Happy Spoon Cafe, where her grandmother was wiping down tables in her faded uniform, a plan was already forming in his mind. One that would challenge Mrs. Harrington's perceptions and perhaps heal something broken in both the toy shop owner and the little girl who dreamed of beautiful things. Rain continued to fall as Keanu left the Happy Spoon Cafe an hour later. His conversation with Lily and her grandmother, Mrs. Morgan, had been illuminating. The elderly woman's pride was evident in her straight back and dignified manner, despite the visible signs of hard work on her weathered hands. She had been suspicious at first, not recognizing the actor beneath his casual disguise, but Lily's eager recounting of his kindness had softened her. Keanu learned that Mrs. Morgan had been raising Lily since a car accident claimed her parents 3 years ago. Medical bills had depleted what little savings the family had, leaving grandmother and granddaughter to rebuild their lives from almost nothing. Yet despite their circumstances, there was love in that small family, a wealth that Eleanor Harrington, for all her expensive toys, seemed to lack. With newfound determination, Keanu returned to Barrington's luxury toys. The store was quieter now, the rain having discouraged casual shoppers. Mrs. Harrington was adjusting a display of handcrafted rocking horses when the bell above the door announced his entrance. She turned with the practiced smile she reserved for customers, but it faltered slightly when she recognized the man who had witnessed the earlier incident. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist you today?" Her tone was professional but cautious. Keanu approached the counter, removing his cap and unwinding his scarf. Recognition flickered in Mrs. Harrington's eyes, followed quickly by disbelief and then the particular brand of excitement reserved for celebrity sightings. "Mr. Reeves," she breathed, composing herself quickly. What an unexpected honor. I'm Eleanor Harrington, owner of Barrington's. Is there something special you're looking for? A gift, perhaps? Actually, Keanu replied, his voice quiet but firm, I'd like to discuss what happened earlier with the little girl. The smile froze on Mrs. Harrington's face. I'm afraid I had to enforce our store policies. Barrington's caters to a certain clientele. A clientele that doesn't include children who dream bigger than their circumstances? Keanu interrupted. His tone remained gentle despite the challenge in his words. I watched that little girl with the doll. She treated it with more respect than most children who can afford it. Mrs. Harrington's cheeks colored slightly. Mr. Reeves, you don't understand. We've had issues with people who come in only to look. It disrupts the shopping experience for our actual customers. And what makes someone an actual customer? Keanu asked. The clothes they wear? Or is it their ability to see the value in what you sell? He glanced around the store, taking in the meticulously arranged toys. Because from what I saw, Lily Morgan values that beautiful dreamer doll more than anyone who might casually purchase it. The name caught Mrs. Harrington off guard. You know her name? I do. I also know she lives with her grandmother who works 2 jobs. I know she lost her parents. And I know that coming here to see that doll is one of the few joys in her life. Keanu leaned forward slightly. What I don't know is why that threatens you. Mrs. Harrington bristled. It doesn't threaten me. That's absurd. I simply have a business to run. A business started by your grandfather, right? Keanu had noticed the old photographs on the wall behind the register. Did he build this store to sell toys, or to bring joy to children? The question hung in the air between them. Mrs. Harrington's gaze drifted to the black and white photograph of a smiling man surrounded by children of all backgrounds, proudly standing in front of a much smaller version of Barrington's. That was a different time, she said finally, her voice smaller. Maybe, Keanu acknowledged. But children haven't changed. Their need for magic, for beauty, for dreams, that's the same. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Mrs. Harrington, I'd like to propose something. A challenge, if you will. Eleanor Harrington had spent decades building walls around her store, around her perceptions, around herself. Yet standing before her was Keanu Reeves. Not just a celebrity whose endorsement could boost her business, but a man whose gaze seemed to see right through those walls. What kind of challenge? She asked, curiosity momentarily overcoming her defensiveness. Keanu smiled, recognizing the first crack in her facade. One that might change the way you see your customers, and yourself. The next morning dawned clear after the previous day's rain. Keanu arrived at the Morgan apartment in Oak Ridge, a neighborhood where faded buildings stood in stark contrast to downtown's gleaming facades. Mrs. Morgan answered his knock with surprise despite his promised visit, perhaps having convinced herself overnight that their cafe encounter had been a strange dream. Mr. Reeves, you really came, she said, smoothing her worn house dress self-consciously. Please come in. It's not much, but... It's perfect, Keanu interrupted gently, stepping into the small living room. The apartment was modest but immaculately kept. Faded furniture showed signs of careful repair. Lily's schoolbooks were neatly stacked on a small desk in the corner. The walls displayed framed drawings, Lily's artwork, alongside family photographs showing happier times. Lily emerged from the bedroom, eyes widening at the sight of their visitor. Today, recognizing him without his disguise, she understood exactly who had walked her to the cafe yesterday. You're really Keanu Reeves, she whispered, awe in her voice. Keanu smiled, sitting down on the offered couch. And you're really Lily Morgan. I think that makes us even. Over the next hour, Keanu explained his proposition. He had convinced Mrs. Harrington to participate in what he called a perspective experiment. The details remained vague to the Morgans, but he assured them it would be meaningful. What he needed now was to understand more about their lives. Not out of pity, but to build an authentic bridge between worlds that rarely intersected. Mrs. Morgan initially resisted, her pride evident. We manage just fine, she insisted, hands folded tightly in her lap. I've never asked for charity. This isn't charity, Keanu assured her. This is about changing perceptions, including Mrs. Harrington's. Sometimes people need to see beyond their assumptions, and you and Lily can help with that. Gradually, the elderly woman's resistance softened. She spoke of her late daughter and son-in-law, of the medical bills that had drained their resources, of her determination to give Lily stability despite their circumstances. She showed Keanu the corner where she mended neighbors' clothes for extra income, pointed out the leak in the ceiling that the landlord had promised to fix for months, and explained how she stretched each grocery trip to last as long as possible. Lily, initially shy, eventually opened her small closet to show Keanu her treasures: a collection of smooth stones from the park, a bird feather found on the way to school, a photograph of her parents, and a shoebox containing $27.53, her savings toward the beautiful Dreamer doll. "I put away 50 cents every week," she explained seriously. "Grandmother says at this rate, I'll have enough when I'm 14, but that's okay. Beautiful Dreamer is worth waiting for." The simple statement, delivered with such earnest conviction, seemed to confirm something for Keanu. He thanked them both for their time and trust, promising to be in touch soon. What the Morgans didn't know was that after leaving their apartment, Keanu made several stops throughout Westfield. He visited the local community center, speaking with the director about after-school programs. He had coffee with the mayor, an old acquaintance from a previous film shoot in the city. He spent an hour with the owner of the largest department store in town, and another hour with the publisher of the Westfield Chronicle. By late afternoon, Keanu returned to Barrington's. Mrs. Harrington was helping a customer, but her eyes followed him as he moved through the store, examining toys with genuine interest. When the customer left, she approached him cautiously. "Have you come to continue yesterday's conversation, Mr. Reeves?" Her tone was polite but guarded. "I've come to share what I've learned," he replied, "and to see if you're still open to that challenge." Eleanor Harrington hesitated. After Keanu's departure yesterday, she had spent a restless night. The photograph of her grandfather, surrounded by children from all walks of life, had haunted her. She remembered stories her father had told about how her grandfather had sometimes given toys to children who couldn't afford them, believing that imagination shouldn't be a luxury for only the wealthy. Somewhere along the way, Eleanor had lost that vision. Barrington's had become exclusive not just in the quality of its merchandise but in who was welcome inside. The realization was uncomfortable, challenging the identity she had constructed around herself and her store. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked finally. Keanu explained his plan, not a grand gesture of charity that would allow Mrs. Harrington to feel momentarily virtuous before returning to business as usual, but a structural shift in how Barrington's engaged with the community. It would start with Lily but extend far beyond her. It would require Mrs. Harrington to reconsider not just who her customers were, but what her business truly meant to Westfield. As he spoke, something shifted in Eleanor's expression. Skepticism giving way to consideration, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of inspiration. "It won't be easy," Keanu concluded. "Changing perceptions never is. But I think your grandfather would be proud." Eleanor looked again at the photograph on the wall, then back to Keanu. "Tell me more," she said. Within days, whispers began circulating through Westfield. Something unusual was happening at Barrington's Luxury Toys. The exclusive store, long known for its unattainable elegance, was changing. It started with small things: a community corner, appearing near the front window, showcasing affordable items under $20. A handwritten sign invited children to handle the display toys in this section. Most surprisingly, Eleanor Harrington herself could be seen greeting every customer, regardless of their attire or apparent social status. Behind these changes was an unlikely partnership between the store owner and Keanu Reeves, though the actor insisted on remaining in the background. His challenge to Mrs. Harrington had been multifaceted: to create programs making Barrington's accessible to all children, to engage with the community beyond her wealthy clientele, and to remember the original purpose of her grandfather's store: bringing joy to children, not just selling expensive toys. The transformation wasn't immediate or without resistance. Several of Eleanor's longtime customers expressed confusion at the changes. "I've always appreciated the exclusive atmosphere here," one woman commented, eyeing a group of public school children who had been invited to a special Saturday morning story time in the store. "Exclusivity and excellence aren't the same thing," Eleanor had responded, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Barrington's will always offer the finest toys, but my grandfather built this business believing that every child deserves a bit of magic." Local businesses began taking notice. The owner of Westfield Bakery started providing free cookies for the Saturday story time. The community theater donated tickets for underprivileged families. The Westfield Chronicle ran a feature about Eleanor Harrington's return to her roots, highlighting her grandfather's history of community engagement that had been forgotten over the years. Through it all, Keanu worked quietly in the background, making phone calls, connecting people, suggesting ideas, but always ensuring that Eleanor remained the face of the transformation. This wasn't about a celebrity's charity, it was about a community rediscovering its heart. Mrs. Morgan watched these developments with cautious optimism. After Keanu's visit, she had received an invitation from Mrs. Harrington to bring Lily to a special event at the store. The elegant card, hand-delivered, offered no details beyond a date and time, requesting their presence for an important occasion. "What do you think it means, grandmother?" Lily had asked, tracing the gold-embossed lettering on the invitation. "I'm not sure," Mrs. Morgan replied honestly. "But Mr. Reeves seems to think it's important." Lily hadn't returned to Barrington's since her humiliating ejection. The memory still brought tears to her eyes, though she tried to hide them from her grandmother. The beautiful dreamer remained in her thoughts, but now those thoughts were tinged with shame. What if Mrs. Harrington only wanted to make her feel small again? Unknown to the Morgans, Eleanor Harrington was experiencing her own transformation. After initially agreeing to Keanu's challenge primarily because of his celebrity status, she found herself genuinely affected by the changes in her store. Watching children from all backgrounds engage with toys, some purchasing, others simply experiencing moments of joy, reminded her of why she had loved working in her grandfather's store as a young girl. Eleanor had also visited Oak Ridge, touring the community center and meeting families struggling to provide basics, let alone toys for their children. The experience had been uncomfortable, forcing her to confront her own prejudices and the narrow world she had constructed around herself. Yet discomfort gave way to something unexpected: purpose. For years, she had been the caretaker of Barrington's legacy without truly understanding what that legacy was meant to be. As the date of the special event approached, activity at Barrington's intensified. Deliveries arrived after hours. Staff worked late, rearranging displays. Eleanor herself could be seen poring over old photographs and ledgers from her grandfather's time, sometimes with tears in her eyes. The Westfield Chronicle ran another story, this one featuring a photograph from 1952 showing Eleanor's grandfather giving a toy to a child whose clothes marked him as poor, alongside a recent photo of Eleanor reading to a diverse group of children in the store's news story corner. The headline read, "Barrington's returns to its roots, a legacy reborn." Through it all, Eleanor kept thinking of Lily Morgan and the beautiful dreamer doll. The memory of escorting the child from the store no longer filled her with righteous certainty, but with a growing sense of shame. The special event she was planning wouldn't erase that moment, but perhaps it could begin to heal the harm she had caused. The morning of the special event arrived with perfect late summer weather. Sunshine spilled over Magnolia Avenue, highlighting the newly polished windows of Barrington's luxury toys. A small crowd had gathered outside the store, curious about the "closed for special events" sign displayed on the door. Through the windows, people could see transformed interiors. The usual sparse, museum-like displays had given way to colorful arrangements designed for interaction rather than mere admiration. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mrs. Morgan and Lily arrived at Barrington's front entrance. Lily clutched her grandmother's hand tightly, her free hand smoothing down the front of her best dress, a simple blue cotton frock, carefully ironed but visibly worn. Mrs. Morgan had tied Lily's hair with a matching ribbon found in her sewing basket, and the child looked both nervous and hopeful. Eleanor Harrington herself opened the door, wearing not her usual tailored suit but a casual dress with a colorful scarf. The change in her appearance was subtle but significant, reflecting the changes occurring within. "Mrs. Morgan, Lily, thank you for coming," Eleanor greeted them, her voice softer than Lily remembered. "Please come in." As they entered, Lily gasped. The store had been transformed. The central display now featured an elaborate dollhouse community, with the beautiful dreamer doll prominently placed among other dolls of various styles, colors, and price points. Around the central display, the store had been reorganized into themed sections, each containing toys at different price ranges, all beautifully presented with equal care regardless of cost. Most surprising was the presence of other guests. The mayor stood chatting with the community center director. The owner of the Happy Spoon Cafe where Mrs. Morgan worked was there. Teachers from the local schools mingled with business owners from both downtown and Oak Ridge. And standing quietly near the beautiful dreamer display was Keanu Reeves, watching Lily's reaction with a gentle smile. "Everyone," Eleanor announced, her voice carrying across the room. "Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I have something important to say." The room quieted as Eleanor turned to face Lily and Mrs. Morgan directly. "Lily," she began, "the last time you were in my store, I treated you unkindly. I judged you by your appearance rather than seeing you as a child who loves beautiful things. I was wrong, and I am truly sorry." Lily blinked in surprise, her hand tightening around her grandmother's. Eleanor continued, addressing the wider audience now. "For years, I've believed that Barrington's was about exclusivity, that our value came from who couldn't access us rather than what we offered. In doing so, I betrayed my grandfather's vision." She gestured to a newly hung portrait of the original Mr. Barrington, displayed alongside the store's first advertisement from 1947, where every child can find wonder. "Today," Eleanor announced, "we're returning to that mission. I'm proud to introduce the Barrington's Community Program." She explained the initiative, a sliding-scale pricing system for certain toys, a monthly free play day where children could enjoy the store without pressure to purchase, a toy library allowing children to borrow items, and a scholarship fund for art and music lessons at the community center. "None of this would have happened," Eleanor acknowledged, "without two people who helped me see differently. First, Mr. Keanu Reeves, who witnessed my behavior and challenged me to do better." Keanu nodded acknowledgement but kept the focus on Eleanor, recognizing the importance of her ownership of both the mistake and the solution. "And most importantly," Eleanor continued, looking directly at Lily, "a young girl whose love for the beautiful Dreamer doll reminded me why toys matter in the first place. Not as status symbols, but as sparks for imagination and comfort during difficult times." Eleanor moved toward the display and carefully lifted the beautiful Dreamer doll, bringing it to where Lily stood. "Lily Morgan, this doll has always been yours in spirit. The way you looked at her, spoke to her, treated her with such care. That's what toys are meant for. Today, she becomes yours in truth as well, with my most sincere apologies and my thanks for teaching me what I had forgotten." Eleanor gently placed the beautiful Dreamer in Lily's trembling hands. The room erupted in applause as tears spilled down Lily's cheeks. Mrs. Morgan stood straight-backed, her own eyes glistening with emotion. As Lily held her beautiful Dreamer, the doll's music box began to play that haunting lullaby, the one that had reminded her of her mother, of comfort, of belonging. The melody filled the store, punctuating Eleanor's words and the beginning of a new chapter for Barrington's luxury toys. Keanu watched the scene unfold, satisfaction in his eyes. This wasn't just about one doll or one child. It was about breaking down the invisible barriers that separated communities, about remembering that kindness should never be a luxury good. 1 year later, Barrington's Luxury Toys celebrated the first anniversary of its community program with a special exhibition. Children's artwork covered the walls, drawings inspired by toys from the store's new lending library. In the center of the main display stood a photograph of Lily holding the beautiful Dreamer doll, now framed alongside pictures of other children with their special toys. The transformation of Barrington's had rippled throughout Westfield in ways no one could have predicted. The sliding-scale pricing system, initially met with skepticism from business owners, had actually increased overall sales as the store welcomed customers who had previously felt unwelcome. More importantly, it had changed the store's atmosphere from one of hushed reverence to joyful engagement. Other businesses followed Eleanor's lead. The bookstore began a children's reading program where kids could earn books through participation. The local movie theater introduced community tickets, available at reduced prices. Even the elite ballet studio offered scholarships to talented children from Oak Ridge. For the Morgans, life had changed in personal ways. Mrs. Morgan still worked at the Happy Spoon Cafe, but now as the manager rather than a cleaning lady. The cafe owner had recognized her meticulous work ethic and promoted her after Eleanor's public acknowledgement of her character. Lily had blossomed. The beautiful Dreamer doll remained her most treasured possession, but it was no longer her only source of joy. She participated in art classes at the community center, classes sponsored by the Barrington Scholarship Fund, where her talent had flourished. Her paintings now sold at the small gallery attached to Barrington's, providing additional income for the family. The Morgans still lived in Oak Ridge, but their apartment building had seen improvements since the community initiative brought attention to neglected neighborhoods. The leaky ceiling was finally fixed. A small garden had been planted in what was once a trash-filled courtyard. Most importantly, the invisible wall between downtown and Oak Ridge had begun to crumble. As for Eleanor Harrington, the changes ran deepest. She had kept a journal throughout the year, documenting her evolving perspective. "I thought I was protecting a legacy," she wrote, "when in fact I was betraying it. My grandfather understood that toys aren't just possessions. They're possibilities. That understanding built Barrington's, and I nearly destroyed it by forgetting." Keanu Reeves had left Westfield after his filming concluded, but his impact remained. He rarely spoke publicly about his role in Barrington's transformation, deflecting credit to Eleanor and the community whenever asked. He did, however, visit occasionally, usually without fanfare, to check on the program's progress and to bring new books for the Story Corner. On the anniversary celebration day, as children played throughout the store and parents from all walks of life chatted comfortably together, Lily approached Eleanor with a beautiful dreamer doll in her arms. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, her voice confident now, no longer the whisper of the child afraid to take up space, "I wanted to tell you that beautiful dreamer has been the best friend I could have asked for." Eleanor knelt to Lily's level, a habit she had developed over the year of truly seeing the children who visited her store. "I'm so glad, Lily. But you know what? You've been the best friend Barrington's could have asked for." The store that had once ejected a child for looking poor had found its heart again, reminding everyone in Westfield that kindness should never be a luxury and that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in how we see and treat one another.